Good morning. I trust that this week has been rather eventful for you. I know it has been for our home and for us as a church staff. Last Sunday, we left to take an overnight little retreat so that we can pray through our planning and just get everyone on the same page with the opening up of Kittery. And so we rented a home up in Guilford, and we got up there Sunday evening and had some dinner, and then we went to bed, woke up, no power. About 95% of Guilford was without power and so many of the surrounding communities. But I'll tell you what, you'd be really proud of your team here at Bethany. Pastor John got on the phone, started looking around, wound up, we went to a diner. We had breakfast there. We wound up staying over. They only had one table in this small little diner in Laconia, and it was the only table that could seat 8, and there were 7 of us, and it was perfect. So we went and had breakfast. We talked through a lot of our agenda. We stayed through lunch, and we left there at about 2:30 in the afternoon. John got online, found a place for us to meet at a local community college, and they opened it up. And so we had a room there, and we didn't leave until about 6:30 that night. So we don't need any power. We just went around, found a place, and it was all good. Come home, and no power in my house. So it has been quite the week. So listen, I think that's just God's way of saying a season for everything, right? Life comes at us on so many different levels. I want to share with you today a whole nother look at a passage in the book of Ecclesiastes that's just going to take us another step deeper. You see, as we've noticed in the past, Solomon is very, very purposeful in his writing. In fact, if you were to go to the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, you'd find in chapter 12 that there is a very strong summary statement when Solomon himself writes, "This is the conclusion of the whole matter." Well, throughout the book, though, he has been providing us with these summary statements so that every few chapters he sums up his argument as it's been building. And so we saw that, for instance, in chapter 2, Solomon drew the conclusion that after a lifetime of achievement and accumulations, and with all of the diverse and unique experiences that he had, he came to this conclusion, that without God, who can eat or find enjoyment? Because it is not within our power to bring that level of enjoyment out of our wealth or our accumulations or our experiences. It is something that comes as a gift from God. That's why people could be looking for this in all of these places and still wind up at the end of their day coming up short. And then he went on, and if that was his own personal experience, as he saw, look, without God in my life, where am I going to find this enjoyment? Then he started looking out at the world around him, and Solomon reached a related conclusion that's expressed in Ecclesiastes 5:18-20, and we learned this, that enjoyment, not riches, is the thing most to be desired. It's not a matter of just having stuff. It's making sure that we're enabling ourselves to enjoy all that we have as a result of this relationship that we have with God, who gives us a different lens by which to look out on our life, on which to think deeply about where our life is headed and the purpose and meaning for which he has placed us here in this world. So the capacity to enjoy is this gift of God, independent of and additional to whatever accumulations we get in this world. The condition of the gift is simply stated when he says, to the man who pleases God, God gives wisdom and knowledge and happiness, joy. See, if a man's ways please God, then God is pleased to give to him. And that's why the whole basis of this book, as Solomon begins to look at how sometimes if we just look at life from our perspective, what we wind up with is sometimes a very pessimistic look. But Solomon is always interjecting that that's not God's plan. God has something much bigger for us. What he really desires is for us to know him, and in knowing him, we begin to have our minds kind of awakened to all the things that God is doing and the place that we get to play in this grand work of redemption. So, those two conclusions, that without God, who can eat or find enjoyment, and that enjoyment is the thing that is really most to be desired, we're going to move on now in Solomon's writings, because over the next few weeks, we're going to study chapters 6 through 8. And many commentators see this as really the central portion of Ecclesiastes, because here we begin by considering life experiences that can sometimes leave us a bit befuddled. Issues that, if they're left unresolved, may inhibit our full enjoyment of this life that God is promising. So what I want to share with you now is you do well to take these words to heart. It will make all the difference in the joy that you experience this side of heaven. And so I want to point out to you some of these truths that Solomon now is going to bring to the forefront. I want you to hear a little bit more of an argument in support of living this life to the glory of God. So if you have your sermon notes, why don't you turn to that page, and there you'll see I placed a heading. I want us to think deeply about what you consider good. Think about what you consider good. Keep that in your head. And now let's look at this text and see if that definition that you have is in line with Solomon's teachings this morning. Ecclesiastes 6 says, I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on men. Well, now that he's got our attention, what is he going to say? He says, God gives a man wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing his heart desires. But God does not enable him to enjoy them, and a stranger enjoys them instead. This is meaningless. It's so illusory. It's a puzzle. It's a grievous evil. See, when I read this text, you get this conundrum, right? Here you have these possessions, you have prosperity. God may even give you a level of influence. And he says, and when you look at all of those things together, you come to this conclusion. And that is that gifts, without the giver, are really not gifts. There's nothing really good in having wealth and honor and possessions if you can't enjoy them. And we've looked at passages over the last few weeks that gave us some understanding of that, haven't we? That one, if we have as our central motivation the love of money, you're never going to have enough, because we all possess this insatiable appetite. We always want more and more and more. And so when is enough enough? And sometimes we can spend all our time thinking about what we're going to lose out on, that we never really enjoy what is before us. Or we always are chasing something that it just seems we're never able to enjoy again what is before us. So whether it's in our searching or in our inability to really become thankful over what God has given, all the wealth, all the possessions, all the honor, it just seems to go by the wayside. And Solomon says, look, when I looked out and observed this, it was such a puzzling thing to me. And then he goes on and he gives another expression of what sometimes we consider good, because I think everybody would think, hey, this is great, man. If a guy has all this wealth and possessions and honor, man, he's living the good life. But instead here it says, if he doesn't have the gift of God that enables him to enjoy them, then it's a puzzle. It's grievous. He goes on, he says, a man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. Think about that. A child that is never really born to thrive. Solomon takes this very dark turn, and notice what he says. He says, speaking of the stillborn child, it says, it comes without meaning, it departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice over, but fails to enjoy his prosperity. Do not all go to the same place? So again, to live your life with great prosperity and with a posterity. Children, there's a hyperbole here, right? Even if he had 100. But he hasn't the ability to really enjoy what he has. Even if he has long life, what good does it do? Because what he's also saying here is that a long life, apart from the author of life, is no life at all. There isn't anything inherent in just having this prosperity, because the prosperity, if it isn't coupled along with this gift of God, which enables us to enjoy these things, then there may be these seasons, and it could be fun and entertaining. But like with so many, they get to a place in their life, and then after a while, the thrill is gone. And now all of a sudden, it's on to another adventure. And the next thing you realize, like, I might want to do more, but my body is saying no. I have dreams, but I now don't have the ability to fulfill them. And so much of what may be an obstacle or an encumbrance is simply because we're not really fully in a space where we are enjoying all the things that God has given. So Solomon is looking out on this life and he's saying, look, what good is it then to have all this and not being able to enjoy it? What good is it to have long life, tons of kids? He says, because if you can't enjoy it, it's like, what was this life about? He goes on in verse 7, he says, all man's efforts are for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. What advantage has a wise man over a fool? What does a poor man gain by knowing how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Think about that. There is this illusion, right? If we're all driven by our appetites, it says here in the text, you're never going to be satisfied. And so when you read this and you're getting this counsel, remember I said we have to think deeply about what we think is good. And here, all of this ambition, if it's just pleasing me, it says, don't you realize you're never really going to be satisfied with that? And how long do we have to live until we figure it out? Remember, if you were here last week, I put up a quote even from Jim Carrey, famous comedian, who says, look, I wish that everybody could get whatever they dream of, have all the riches and fame, so that they come to the conclusion that they're not going to find it there. So what is he teaching us here? He's teaching us that gift without the giver are not really gifts. That a long life apart from the author of life is no life at all. And I would suggest here that what he's saying to us is don't be ruled by your appetite. Because if that's our approach to life, he says, don't you realize if all your efforts are just to satisfy this longing, it will never be satisfied. It's always something beyond your grasp. And while we're young and we have all of this enthusiasm and these doors of opportunity are opening, you do realize that there is, as we've said 101 times here already, there is a shelf life on all of that. And then at the end of the days, is it going to be enough? Are you going to find that sense of contentment in your own soul? I can tell you, having conversations with many individuals, they're looking for something more. And I suggest that that more is found in the author of life, the giver of the gift. Look at verse 10. Whatever exists has already been named, and what man is has been known. No man can contend with one who is stronger than he. The more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? For who knows what is good for a man in life during the few and meaningless days he passes through like a shadow? Who can tell him what will happen under the sun after he is gone? You see, when you read this text, it's beginning to point out a couple of things. Just look at verse 12 for a moment. I want you to underline there where it says, who knows what is good? The implication is that man doesn't know what's good because we are so easily distracted. If we're chasing after our own appetites, he says, then how are we ever really going to find that? And the implication here is that, or the insinuation here is that God is the one who knows what is good. And because we're finite and he's infinite, then we also have to deal with the fact that our days are like a shadow. They're a vapor. They appear for a little while and then they're gone. We don't know the end from the beginning. But it says, who can tell him what will happen under the sun after he's gone? Again, it's beyond our purview. So think about this. The best laid plans of men. Is it really bringing us that sense of satisfaction that we really long for? I think Solomon is writing these things because he's saying, I want you to think deeply about what is good. Because when you look here, he's saying, you need to remember your limitations. You need to remember those limitations. Because if we're pursuing wealth, you realize that that's not going to translate into joy. If it's all about just living life, a long life, that in itself isn't necessarily going to lead us to great joy. But a life that pleases God, says will bring the gift of God, was the ability to enjoy all of life's circumstances. That's why the Apostle Paul, writing in Timothy, to Timothy, would say, godliness with contentment is great gain. Because we know how to live in plenty, and we know how to live in want. Our sense of well-being isn't this roller coaster ride dependent just on all the circumstances. You see, what he's saying to us here is we have to readjust what sometimes we think is good, because the good things that we have listed may not really produce all that we think they should. But now let's flip that coin over a little bit. And I want us to turn our attention to another little surprise here. Only this time I want you to think not so much about what you consider to be good, but I want you to think about what you consider bad. Now, Solomon is going to introduce a number of thoughts, and he does this comparative thing. Notice here in chapter 7, verse 1, we change this tone now. All the things that we thought ought to be good, wealth, honor, possessions, long life, apart from a relationship with God that enables us to really see these things clearly, the gifts that they truly are, then we're left to our own ambitions and our own appetites. But here, he says, notice, a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death better than the day of birth. In fact, it is better to go to a house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of every man. The living should take this to heart. I think what most of us, when you read that, it kind of catches you off guard. What does he mean it's better? A good name is better than fine perfume. That good name, a reputation that lingers. And he says it has a more pleasing aroma than even fine perfume. The proverb that Solomon wrote says a good name is of more value than silver or gold. Better to go to a house of mourning than the day of birth. And why is that? See, what he's saying is, you may think that this is bad, but he's saying reflection, sober reflection, is a very good thing. An unexamined life is not worth living. I've been asked to officiate many funerals. I officiated over my brother that died in that Vietnam conflict. I officiated over my mother's funeral, my sister's. We went to her home and gathered all the family together and shared some words about her. You know what I've noticed over the years? That a funeral, it puts us in touch with our own mortality for a moment. That in the busyness of our life, when we're chasing all kinds of dreams and ambitions, all of a sudden someone close to you passes away, and in that brief moment, you are brought face to face with the reality of your own mortality. And we go to this funeral, and what do? We reminisce about those times that we may have shared with someone that you may have really, really loved and cherished, and realize how death, it is such a foe. It's consuming. You know what else I found with funerals, though? That it gave us opportunity to think for a moment on what's really important. We suddenly, if you knew someone who had a good name, a great reputation, you not find yourself thinking about what made that person so special? That the kindnesses, their love. See, now all of a sudden, this mourning scene, it is sobering us up to the reality of our own temper, the fact that we're temporary. We're mortal. That there are purposes that exist beyond this grave. And for that, we ought to be grateful. We walk away sobered up to recognize that maybe what I've considered good, I've misplaced that appraisal. Because now God is telling me, no, a good name is better than fine perfume. And going to a funeral may be just a wake-up call to recognize that we too are mortal, and one day we will stand before the God who has given us life and breath. Are you prepared for that day? Look at verse 3. He says, sorrow is better than laughter, because a sad face is good for the heart. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure. I read this and I thought, yeah, we'd rather be in the house of pleasure than in the house of mourning. But this text from Solomon is telling us that there's more value sometimes in the sorrow than just in the laughter. I put down here, why? Because what he's saying is if there's no pain, there's no gain. Have you ever noticed that we tend to remember the lessons that we've learned in adversity? The pain that we experience as a result of poor decisions or poor actions that we have taken? The pain that's associated with our addictive kinds of behavior becomes the open door to a path of recovery. We get tired of hitting our head against that same wall. We get tired of doing these same things only to get the same result. But if we take a moment to reflect on these things, if we recognize that the sorrow in and of itself may not be a bad thing because it may be wising us up, that we're going down the wrong directions. We're going down the wrong road. It's time to make a U-turn. Turn around. The Bible talks about the word repent. It's a great word. Because what it's really saying to us is stop living your life in such reckless fashion. No pain, no gain. You know, it says here, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. Maybe it gave you just a little bit more insight into what Jesus would say when he looked out on a broken mass of humanity and he addressed them with the Beatitudes when he said, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Here's another thing that we think may be bad, but it could be good. Verse 5, he says, it's better to heed a wise man's rebuke than to listen to the song of fools. Like the crackling of thorns under the pot, so the laughter of fools. This too is so transitory. Such an illusion. So meaningless. When he says like the crackling of thorns under the pot, the reference is to a kindling. You know, you use kindling to start a fire, right? But kindling, it starts something that it really can't finish. If it doesn't have the other fuel to come along, that fire is not going to be long-lived. No. Instead, what we find here is the reference here is to the fleeting pleasures of this life, which will never be a substitute for a life that's built on the promises of God. That's why when he says here, don't listen to the song of the fools, I think what he's really saying to you is pick out a song that will stay with you forever. You ever have a tune that's in your head? You may have heard it years and years ago, and every once in a while it just comes to the forefront, and you find yourself singing it or humming it along. It's just got your attention. It's just captured you in a particular way. Here it's saying that the wise man's rebuke ought to be better than some of these foolish songs, because they're just going to be here for a short time, and then they're going to pass on. You see, we have to cherish the education that God is giving us in these moments. In the times of sorrow, in the times when the way is getting a little hard, it's in those moments that God, having your attention, is beginning to say, can you cherish this education that I'm giving you? Because if you do, you will learn lessons that will bring you life. Because this foolish way, this easy way, it's sapping the very life out of you, and sometimes you're not going to know it until you get old. That's exactly what happens to Solomon, right? He goes on, he says, extortion turns a wise man into a fool. A bribe corrupts the heart. Why? Because there's these promises of big things, big promises, but sad endings. We envision what this is going to be like. We already are spending the money. We're already exercising the influence. We're already, seeing ourselves going to the big parties. And then all of a sudden you don't realize that you kind of sold yourself out. That in the end of the day, it's never really going to produce much. Just in these last few decades, can you not in your mind bring to mind people who were famous, who had influence, who may have taken a part here in this kind of bribe or corruption, and now they find themselves behind bars and their life has really lost all its joy. So notice here he says, the end of the matter is better than its beginning. Patience is better than pride. Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Don't say, why were the old days better than these? Have you ever said that? The old days are better than these. He says, don't say that, for it's not wise to ask such questions. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing and benefits those who see the sun. Meaning it benefits life. Because see, we're living under this sun. You're on the right side of the grass. It says wisdom is meant to help you in this life. Wisdom is a shelter, as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this, that wisdom preserves the life of its possessor. Consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? I put in your text a reference to the book of James. Because when I read this text, what came to my mind was this passage in James chapter 1, when it says, my dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. There is a sense of impatience, dissatisfaction. There is this wrestling with the seasons of life that come. And if we find ourselves out of sorts, if things aren't working exactly the way we think they are, then we lose sight of perhaps maybe how God is working in and through these things and prying our hands open so that we learn to trust in him more than we trust in our own efforts. I thought about that this past weekend. We had all these plans. We're going up there for sacred business. We want to do the best job to extend the gates of the kingdom of heaven. Then why would we have to deal with all of the uncertainties? You get up there, the house doesn't even work. When the power went out, there was no water. There was nothing all around the town. And we're thinking, okay, maybe we should just pack up and go home. And then we able to get a signal and we find, in Laconia there's a diner there. When we go there, we'll have breakfast and then we'll sit around and we'll have a conversation. We wound up staying there until 2:30, talking about nothing more than about how are we going to help Bethany Church to live up to its mission, to be a church where disciples are making disciples, where people are enthusiastic about their walk with God, so enthusiastic that they have to share it with someone else. And then in the course of that conversation, there was a couple that was sitting on the side, and Pastor John had an opportunity to talk to them. Turns out the lady was the dean of the local college, and she's the one that says, look, follow me, I'll bring you over there, I'll make sure you get a room. And we wound up staying there until past 6:30 at night. We could have been angry, we could have been, just so perturbed that it kind of ruined the whole weekend. But instead, we saw kindnesses in people everywhere we went. We wound up having this great room that we didn't have to pay, and we canceled out the other night, and we wound up making money. Now, see, God is always in control, and when you begin to look at all the seasons of life and all their activity through that lens, there is a confidence that comes into your own soul. That's why he ends here when he says, when times are good, be happy. When times are bad, consider God has made the one as well as the other. Therefore, a man cannot discover anything about his future because his future is held by God. In this meaningless life of mine, I have seen both of these, a righteous man perishing in his righteousness and a wicked man living long in his wickedness. King Solomon, who lived life, says, life is so puzzling. There are some certainties, but there are so many abnormalities here that he just says, look, at the end of the day, we're called to live by faith because God is the one who holds our future. So you hear the lesson here? The lesson is a very positive lesson. It's taking a look at life and saying what you think is good sometimes can really be bad because you get so caught up in this wealth and ambition and prosperity that you never go deeper. You don't really build those deep roots that are going to help you to stand through the storms of this life. And what we consider to be bad, sometimes we look and we realize, oh, those bad things are the ones that kind of rescued me. They saved me. They pulled me out of such shallow thinking. They pulled me out of a life that was just being, dictated by my own passions. And I realize that there's great value in those moments of reflection because of this one truth. And that is that good is found not in the externals, but by embracing the eternal. Good is not in the externals. The good isn't just in the stuff that we have or the letters and plaques on the walls. The good is going to be found in a relationship that we have with this eternal God, who says, if you know me, if you walk before me in wisdom and knowledge, I will give you this gift of life, the gift of enjoying all that I have given you in the good seasons and the bad, recognizing that I'm using all of this to fashion you more and more into a woman of God, a man of God who loves me and loves his neighbor. Because at the end of the day, when you stand before him, that's going to be on the test. How have you lived your life before men? Can you understand why Jesus would say this word to his disciples when he would say, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full? You want a full life? Then think deeply about what you think is good. You want a full life? Then think a little bit more deeply about what you might consider bad. Because in the economy of God, he kind of switches it around. And we learn some really deep lessons in the sorrow, in the pain, that then gives us an ability to enjoy the good. Because we're not finding our identity in all of that. We find our identity in the one who says, I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. Let's pray. Father, I thank you again for this word from Solomon, such a fitting word in the days in which we're living. Good for reflection, so we go back and we can think over these truths, because the truth will set us free. And in that freedom, Lord, we're able to embrace this life with all of its challenges and invest our lives in a way that brings you honor and glory. So I pray, Lord, that your Spirit would just fall on your church in all of the various communities around us, Lord, that hold to this teaching, that lift up Jesus. I pray, Lord, that you just bless them abundantly. Let their song be heard by the surrounding communities. May this so penetrate our homes and our hearts, so that we run this race of faith with endurance. And we'll be careful to give you all the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.